Why are you here? Why are we here? What does it mean that we are present to the community and to the world around us? Over my years of ministry, I've come to understand that more and more intensely. But it's always been a quality of presence that we as a people give to one another that has been so important in shaping my life. Growing up Unitarian Universalist, it was so important to me. The adults in my life, the people in my life. But I couldn't imagine doing anything else but taking that presence out into the world around me. So the first two congregations I served, I started those congregations. That's how passionately I felt about it. Over the years, though, coming to understand the quality and the importance of that presence and how to speak of that has come out of my experiences as a Unitarian Universalist minister. Perhaps the first time I understood it at a really profound level was when I'd gone to talk to Julie, a member of the church I served many, many years ago. I'd gotten a call from Julie's brother. She was in the hospital, and I'd gone to visit her and was sent to see her in a locked-down psychiatric unit. Julie was struggling with a brain disease we call depression. She had a really very bad case of it. It was life-threatening. The moment I arrived, she looked up. She'd been looking down, just consumed by this disease depression. And when she arrived, she looked up, and she had just, this fury came into her face, just enough fury to momentarily fight the depression, emerge from it. And the first words she said to me were these: "Joel, someone just told me that God never gives us more than we can handle. I'm living proof of how wrong that is. I'm too depressed to smack the idiot who just said that." I was kind of hoping you'd smack him for me. Julie was a very active Unitarian Universalist. For her, the spiritual practice of covenant kind of presence in Unitarian Universalism was perfectly linked to her deep drive to fight injustice. So when her health allowed it, her spirituality was a force of nature. Lifting people out of injustice was the practice of her faith. She would go through the community, and everyone knew who Julie was. And when asked about how her Unitarian Universalism worked in her life, she would say, "It's our covenant. It's why we covenant. It's why we're here. We show up for life." This word, covenant, is an odd word. It's an old Latin word. It means to be gathered, just like we are here this morning. It's also the word that was used in the old times when the Bible was first being gathered together. The Latin word used to translate the ancient Hebrew word, brit. Brit is the word used by Jews throughout history to describe their connection to God. A brit is a covenant, more than a contract, more than a commitment. A brit, a covenant, is to become deeply connected to the holy, to God. that's an image that helps us. Now, because of the diversity of us Unitarian Universalists, our spiritual images are diverse. Some of us find the language or imagery of God deeply connecting. Some of us do not find it helpful at all. Now, Julie, for example, was very, very certain that no one has the one true truth of God, or of not God. Julie described herself as a fierce agnostic. And she was just as fiercely protective of the people in her church who were atheists, who were theists, polytheists. For her, it was showing up for life. Julie's understanding of our covenant. Show up, be with each other, help each other, work for justice. This was the power that brings us together. Covenant is a term. Let's read his phone. I don't want it to break. I don't want to step on it. Covenants unite us. We've been talking, Unitarian Universalists have talked about covenants for a long time. Even though it's this ancient practice when the idea of Brit first shows up in an Old Testament story, this guy named Abraham. Abraham seems to have this ongoing conversation with God in the story. And there's lots of drama and stuff that happens in the story. And finally God says to Abraham, walk with me. I'm making a covenant with you. So they walk. And as they walk together in the conversation, God promises to look after Abraham's descendants, but only if Abraham and his descendants worship God in return. God later makes another covenant with Noah, later character in the story in the Old Testament. And in this covenant, after God drowns everyone else in the world because he's been really mad at them, God makes a unilateral promise not to be so vengeful and angry again. Apparently the Old Testament God got angry a lot. But once again, the theme of covenant shows up. Excuse me. It shows up again in the New Testament. The Rabbi Jesus is walking the land, walking around, teaching about the God of love. This God makes a new covenant, which is actually what the term New Testament literally means, new covenant. The New Testament, the New Covenant, replaces the Old Testament, the Old Covenant. And that begins to affect us in our history as Unitarian Universalists. So on the Universalist side, the New Testament, the New Covenant, was interpreted in this way because of what Jesus taught and the way Jesus spoke. We're all going to be saved. That's what they understood. In a world united by one love, by one holy presence, everything is saved. On our Unitarian side, our Unitarian spiritual ancestors were very deeply drawn to the idea of being on a journey, this idea of walking together. And our Unitarian ancestors were deeply influenced by their spiritual ancestors, who were the Puritans. Now, if you've ever studied the Puritans, they were in England, and then they came over to New England, and sometimes I remember a joke when I was a kid told about the Puritans, that they were dour and fierce, and you had to believe in the one way, and they were the people who had the sneaking suspicion that someone somewhere was having a good time. They were called Puritans because they wanted to purify the church. And when it became possible to settle then in New England on the Atlantic coast of North America, the Puritans arrived to make their own country, a place what's now called Massachusetts. All the towns they started when they arrived had a church called the parish church, because there was only one. Unless the town got really, really large, they might have a second church. So then the first church would be called First Church, and the second church would be called Second Church. And the Puritans were, well, they were like most Europeans back in those days. They could be pretty intolerant, they could be cruel. But after 2 centuries in New England, these hard-hearted Europeans, these Puritans, who proclaimed themselves the people of a covenant, found themselves changed by all this, walking together, these ways of being holy with one another. They became tolerant. Their descendants even became liberal. About half of them became Unitarians. So in most New England towns today, the oldest original churches have names like First Parish of Salem, Unitarian Universalist. The Puritan ancestors in what is now the First Parish of Salem, Unitarian Universalist, they founded their congregation in 1629, and they wrote covenant together. We covenant with the Lord and with one another, and do bind ourselves to walk together in all his ways, according as he is pleased to reveal himself unto us. This walking together, this on a journey with one another again. It's an image of showing up with one another on the journey, to others that we encounter on the journey. Because we aren't really staying in one place. We aren't believing in one thing. Well, not now. The Puritans thought they were believing the same thing. Everybody would read the Bible. They believe in the same thing, right? Because reason and logic would take them to the one true truth. But then that didn't work out so well because people were believing different things and being quite reasonable about it. And then they began to ask, well, wait a minute, but should all our neighbors even be forced to join a church or come to church? And suddenly the practice of covenant required freedom. So then the grandchildren of the Puritans began to govern their towns in this spirit of freedom. Townspeople in New England debated and voted at town meetings on their budgets, on who was going to lead them. And their grandchildren found themselves even more open, more tolerant. Not sure if God was three parts or one part. And most Unitarians at the time thought God was just one being and Jesus was a wonderful teacher, deeply connected with God, and they got the name Unitarian. It was a sneering term at the time, and they decided, oh, okay, we'll just take the term. But they kept on covenanting, these Unitarian ancestors of ours. And in the same way, our congregations choose for themselves, their leaders, their ministers, the board of trustees, the minister that serves you. You as a people choose them. There's no authority that says this is who the person is who's going to lead you. You as a gathered people make those decisions. You vote on your budgets. Together you gather the food that becomes your presence to other people's lives when they're hungry. The nice thing about contributing to your congregation, of course, is that it's a cool way to covenant. You still are showing up for your people, even on Sundays when you've decided to sleep in. Covenants are more than agreements or contracts. They shape our way of life. They shape how we choose to use. And I came to understand this deep way that this way walking together in life shapes us, shapes how we choose to be as human beings. And I realized this with a congregant named Mary. She was a Unitarian Universalist mortgage broker. And when I got to know her, she was losing her mortgage business. It was just about 10 years ago that she had to close it up. She closed it because she refused to make home loans to people she knew who could not afford them. Just about when every other mortgage broker kept on making loans to anybody who asked, if they just lie on the line and say, yes, I can afford it. Mary said to me, I cannot stay in this business and be who I am. I had no integrity. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror before I went to work in the morning. Mary kept her covenant with life. As we all know, 2 years later, all of us, all of our neighbors in the United States got to pay off the costs of all those bad mortgages. Mary was living her covenantal spirituality. She had the courage to do what she knew was right because she had a congregation behind her. She didn't have to do it alone. She had a congregation that cared for her, stood with her, even as she paid a big personal price for her integrity. Covenant gave Mary the courage to be her truest self. Now, I don't always do that perfectly well. Sometimes I show up late and not as present as I should be. I show up at the wrong time, or at the wrong place, or I show up but in body but I'm not fully present. There are good days and there are bad days. I've broken my vows, my covenants 1,000 times. But I keep coming back. I keep coming back because I need you. You need one another. The world needs us. We need this way of walking together, in this world especially, to walk together in our diversity, to walk together in our difference, as well as our similarities. My heart breaks every day in this world, a world that can break people for their race, for their looks, for their physical abilities, for having a quirky soul, for being gay, being transgendered. We live in a world that can break people with addiction, break us with poverty or loss, break us with disease in mind and body, break our bodies sometimes. Another reason for beloved communities like this. So in those moments when I haven't been as present as I should have been, perhaps even caused harm to others, I've come back into community, learned how to forgive, and then been loved when I was still feeling quite unlovable. I've been given a light of hope when I felt like I was in a hopeless darkness. I've seen the fire of my own rage used to forge blessings in the world, instead of setting something ablaze in a rash of violence. I found a way to mend the world out of my anger, out of my error, out of my loss. To mend the world and then mend it again. I want to leave this life having left the world a little better than I found it. To leave something of my presence as a blessing. I came to realize as I understood these strengths and weaknesses that I had in my own self, the joys and sorrows that are a part of my own life, I realized that the congregation I grew up in saved my life. Those people were present for me in times when it was very hard to love myself. And I realized at one point that all of our congregations save lives. And I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean that literally. I have come out of my experiences to understand that you, here in Canandaigua, have saved lives because you're here as a congregation. Just by being in the community, being present to others. Does that seem a little over the top? I don't think it is. I think claiming that you have saved lives is not over the top. This is why I think that. 20 years ago, I was the minister of the Columbine Unitarian Universalist Church. It's a church that I had helped. I was the founding minister of that congregation. Helped start it with the people of that congregation. After we'd gotten ourselves established, we were hosting a gay and lesbian chorus. Now, 20 years ago, in the area called Littleton, Colorado, a suburb of Denver, this was an outrageous act. Most of the folks in the neighborhood attended evangelical Christian churches, and those congregations dominated this neighborhood. So a week before the concert, we wanted to let folks in the neighborhood know we were having this gay and lesbian concert with a gay and lesbian chorus in the congregation. We put posters all up over the neighborhood advertising the concert. Now, we had to put the posters up because there was no other way to advertise in the neighborhood. The neighborhood paper and the radio station that happened to serve that neighborhood, they refused to run our ads. They ran plenty of ads from any other congregation, but they were not running these ads. So we put the posters up. We put them under stop signs. We put them on highway fences. We put them on telephone poles. There were some folks who would put them in their front yards. In just 2 days, some other folks had gone all over the neighborhood and ripped all the posters down. They even ripped down the banner we put on the side of the church building we were in. So we made a new banner. We printed more posters, put them up by the end of that second day. Actually, some of those got torn down. We just, a third time, put more posters up. Not long after the concert then happened, the Columbine Unitarian Universalist Church bought its first building. And one of the first things that we did was hang a rainbow flag from the roof of the building. The one thing that was very helpful was that the flag was too high for someone to get up and tear down, so it stayed. Man, did we get hostile letters. We even got hostile and threatening phone messages. I was in the office one day when the phone rang. I picked the phone up, and the first thing I noticed was that the phone call was coming from a payphone. Some of you might remember payphones. Now most of us carry one of those, right? Well, before everybody had cell phones, payphones, you could still find payphones on many corners, even in a suburb, and especially at busy street intersections, street corners. And you could recognize the sound of a payphone. You'd pick a payphone call because you'd pick it up and you'd hear the trucks and the cars in the background. So I picked up the phone with the greeting, Columbine Unitarian Universalist Church, and there was this long silence. And I said, "Hi, this is Joel Miller." And then suddenly, "Are you the minister?" "Yes," I answered. "Does your church believe it's okay to be gay or lesbian?" Now, understand this was the context of the neighborhood. Not a lot of Unitarian Universalists, many evangelical churches dominating the neighborhood. I had a gut feeling this wasn't a kid from a tolerant family. So this is what I said. I said, "God loves us if we're gay and if we're straight." "Okay, thank you." Look at the phone. Click. Just call in immediately. And the sound of the traffic was gone. A couple of years later, it was just after the shootings at Columbine High School. I was in my office at the Columbine Unitarian Universalist Church. The office manager knocked and then opened the door. She told me there was someone to see me. A young woman came in, invited her to sit. She had 2 old suitcases with her. She put them down next to the couch, and then she sat on the couch across from me, and she began telling me about why she was there. "This church," she said, "I used to go by it. I went by it to get to school every morning. I saw the flag outside. I saw the posters for the concert. I'm gay. I was alone. I couldn't tell my family. I couldn't tell anyone. I called you." "From the payphone?" I asked. "Yes, from the payphone. I called you from a payphone." "I remember," I said. She said, "You know, I was going to kill myself. I thought I'd call you first. You told me God loves me, and I knew it was going to be okay. She turned that very day, she had turned 18. She'd come out to her family and they'd kicked her out. They'd banished her from their lives. The only place she knew to go was that Unitarian Universalist church. So we talked some more about what she would like to do, where she'd like to go. I said, there are many families in this congregation that would be happy to give you a safe place to live for a while as you get established. And she said, well, let's talk a little bit about the congregation. And we talked, and she realized she was still very much a Christian. So I called a liberal Methodist minister I knew and trusted in downtown Denver. The minister said, I'll come down and get her. And this young woman was welcomed into that congregation and the safety of that congregation's homes. This is the ministry you have. It's not a building. It's not a specific belief. It's a presence in the community. You have this ministry. You are in the community around you, making a difference by being present in it. You're showing up for life. You make and remake your covenant, and I see you do it as a kind and compassionate people. I see how you show up here for each other. Keep on showing up. The world needs you, especially in times like these. Keep showing up and be a presence in the larger world where you can be seen. You don't know yet who needs you. The people of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Canandaigua.
Join us for worship every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.